My daddy has the same tattoo. 5 words. From a 3-year-old girl standing alone in a truck stop diner, shaking, pointing at the wolf inked on a biker's forearm. She was barefoot in rain boots held together with tape, clutching a one-eyed stuffed bear, wearing a purple dress 2 sizes too big. She hadn't gone to the waitress, hadn't gone to a single, normal adult in that room. She walked straight to 18 Hells Angels, the biggest, most dangerous men in Tennessee, and said a dead man's name that made every single one of them stop breathing. What she pulled from her pocket next shattered them all. If this story hits you, subscribe right now and stay with me to the very end. Tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. Gunnar hadn't missed a Sunday at Grady's pit stop in 13 years. 63 years old, silver brown hair pulled back, a scar running from his right temple to his jawline, a souvenir from a bar fight in Nashville he still lied about to nurses. 24 years as president of the Hells Angels, Memphis chapter. He'd buried friends, broken bones, ridden through thunderstorms at 90 miles an hour, and never once flinched. But when that little girl hit the table, hands shaking, voice cracking, blood smeared across both kneecaps, Gunnar flinched. "Slow down," he said. "Slow down, sweetheart. Who's beating your friend?" "The man, the big man. He grabbed her and he's hitting her and she's crying and—" Nobody. Gunnar hadn't raised his voice in 6 years, not since Ghost's funeral. Not since he stood over a casket holding a 34-year-old man who had no business being dead and promised himself he'd never let anything crack him open like that again. He'd sealed that door, bolted it, buried the key somewhere between the bottom of a whiskey bottle and a midnight ride through the Smoky Mountains at 90 miles an hour with no headlights. 24 years as president of the Memphis chapter, 63 years old, scar from his temple to his jawline, hands that had broken jaws in bent steel, a voice that could silence a room of 200 men without raising above a whisper, and a wolf tattoo on his left forearm, howling at a crescent moon, flames curling beneath it. That meant more to him than his own name. Every man at these tables had one, not identical, each personalized, but the wolf was the mark, the bond. You didn't buy it, you didn't choose it. You earned it through years of blood, loyalty, and miles that most people couldn't imagine. Sunday mornings at Grady's pit stop had been sacred for 13 years. 3 booths pushed together in the corner, 18 Harleys in the parking lot, 18 men who'd die for each other without hesitation and had come close enough times to stop counting. This particular Sunday, Brick was getting destroyed over a poker hand from Thursday night. "Pair of 4s, Colt said, shaking his head. "You went all in on a pair of 4s. "The river hadn't come yet," Brick said. "The river didn't save you, brother. $600 on a pair of 4s. My dead grandmother plays better poker." "Your dead grandmother cheats." The whole table erupted. Brick, 6'5", 295 pounds, the kind of man who could pick up a motorcycle with one hand, sat there taking it from Colt, the youngest senior member, 38, sandy brown hair, a mouth that ran faster than his Harley. Ratch was doing the math in his head like he always did. Statistically, the odds of winning with a pair of 4s against 3 other players holding. "Nobody asked for the math, Ratch," Fuse said, cracking his knuckles. "I'm just saying the probability was 0, Colt cut in. The probability was 0, and Brick still shoved $600 across the table like a man trying to set money on fire. Judge sat at the end of the booth and said nothing. He never said anything. Dark brown hair going gray at the temples, eyes that read everything and missed nothing. 15 words a day, maybe. But when Judge spoke, everybody listened because every word cost him something. Stitch had his med kit tucked inside his vest, like always. 3 tours in Afghanistan, combat medic, calm hands that had held men together, literally held them together, in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. He drank his coffee black and watched Brick's blood pressure rise with something between amusement and medical concern. Deacon wore his silver cross and sat beside Wraith, who might as well have been a shadow. Dark hair streaked with gray, appeared and disappeared, handled things nobody talked about. If you saw Wraith coming, it was already too late. If you didn't see him, it was even worse. Pike, Rooster, Dutch, Hammer, Torch, Slade, Grizzly, Flint, Boone, and Cash filled out the rest. 10 more brothers, each with their own scars, their own stories, and that same wolf tattoo somewhere on their body. The jukebox played Johnny Cash. Coffee cups clinked. Brick was about to fire back at Colt with something that probably would have started a whole new argument, and then the bell above the door rang. Gunnar didn't look up at first. People came and went. It was a diner. That's what happens. But the room changed. He felt it before he saw it. The way conversations at other tables just stopped. The way the waitress froze mid-step. The way the air shifted like everyone was holding their breath at the same time. He looked up. A little girl stood just inside the door. 3 years old, maybe. Brown curls falling out of a ponytail that someone had tried to fix. But that someone was probably her, because no adult hand had done that. A purple dress 2 sizes too big, the hem dragging on the floor. Rain boots with tape holding the left one together where the toe had split. She was clutching a stuffed bear. One eye missing, stitches where an arm used to be. But it was her eyes that stopped Gunnar cold. Green, wide, ancient. Eyes that didn't belong on a child. Eyes that had already seen too much. Eyes that said something Gunnar recognized in his own mirror every morning. I know what the world does, and I'm still standing. She didn't go to the counter, didn't go to the waitress, didn't go to any of the 20 other people in that diner who would have been a normal, reasonable, safe choice for a lost little girl. She walked straight toward 18 Hell's Angels. Her rain boots squeaked on the tile. Every step was deliberate. Every step was chosen. This wasn't a confused child wandering. This was a child on a mission. Brick's grin faded first, then Colt's. Then the whole table went quiet, one man at a time, like dominoes falling. She stopped 3 feet from Gunnar. Her hands were shaking. The stuffed bear trembled against her chest, but her chin was up. Her jaw was set. And Gunnar felt something move in his chest, something he thought he'd killed a long time ago. She pointed at his left forearm, at the wolf. My daddy has the same tattoo. 18 men froze. Not the kind of freeze where you pause and then continue. The kind where the world stops rotating. The kind where every sound, the jukebox, the kitchen, the coffee machine, falls away and there's nothing left but a little girl's voice and the 5 words she just said. Gunnar's coffee cup stopped midair. Brick's hand went flat on the table. Ratch gripped the edge of the booth so hard his knuckles went white. Colt went pale. Actually pale, like the blood just left his face. Fuse stopped cracking his knuckles for the first time in anyone's memory. Deacon's hand moved to his silver cross. Wraith's eyes narrowed, and Judge leaned forward. The man who never moved unless the world was ending leaned forward. What's your name, sweetheart? Gunnar kept his voice steady. Careful, the way you talk when you're standing on the edge of something and you don't know yet if it's a cliff or a bridge. Haley. Haley what? Haley Mercer. Mercer, the name detonated. Brick's coffee cup crashed onto the table. Brown liquid flooded across the surface, and not one man moved to stop it. Ratch grabbed the booth like the floor had tilted 45 degrees. Colt whispered something under his breath, one word barely audible, and shook his head. Pike, 3 seats down, stood up so fast his chair slammed backward onto the floor. Gunnar felt his chest tighten, not like a heart attack, like a door he'd welded shut, bolted, buried, was being pried open from the other side by hands too small to be real. Who's your daddy, Haley? She didn't hesitate, didn't stutter. Her voice came out steady and clear and impossibly brave for a 3-year-old standing alone in front of 18 men she'd never met. His name was Tyler Mercer, but Mommy says everyone called him Ghost. The sound Brick made wasn't a word. It was something ripped from deep inside him, the kind of sound a man makes when a wound he thought had healed tears open without warning. Colt turned away. His hand went over his face and his shoulders curved inward like he'd been hit. Judge closed his eyes. And that was the thing that told Gunnar this was real. Because Judge never closed his eyes. Judge watched, always. That was his whole identity. The man who never stopped watching, just shut the world out because the pain of seeing was too much. Stitch grabbed the table with both hands. Deacon clutched his cross so tight the chain bit into his neck. Fuse stood up, sat back down, stood up again. His whole body didn't know what to do with what it was feeling. And Wraith, the ghost, the shadow, the man who showed nothing, ever, to anyone, his face cracked, just for a second, like a mask made of granite suddenly revealed the flesh underneath. Then it was gone, but everyone saw it. Ghost, Gunnar said. The word came out like it had been locked in a vault for 6 years and finally broke free. Half prayer, half wound. The kind of word that costs you something every time you say it. You're Ghost's little girl. Haley nodded. Simple, matter of fact. The way children deliver devastating truths, without cushion, without preparation, without mercy. He died. 2 words, and Gunnar felt the world shift. He set his coffee down. He didn't trust his hands. He looked at this child, really looked, and it hit him so hard he nearly lost his breath. Ghost's nose. Ghost's stubborn jaw. That same way of holding her chin up when everything inside was shattering. He'd seen that chin 100 times. On a man who'd ride through hellfire and come out the other side grinning. On a man who'd saved his life and lied about the scar it left. On a man who died at 34 in a bed he couldn't get out of, calling out names in the dark. Gunnar, Brick, Judge, thinking he was back on the road, back in the mountains, back in the only place he'd ever felt free. Pure Ghost, standing right in front of him, 3 feet tall, in rain boots held together with tape. How long? Gunnar's voice was rough now. He wasn't hiding it anymore. How long has your daddy been gone? 8 months. 8 months. Ghost had been dead for 8 months, and none of them knew. None of them were there. The man who saved Gunnar's life, who rode 60 miles through a thunderstorm to bring him medicine, who talked down a rival gang member with nothing but his voice, and saved lives that would have been lost in violence. That man died alone, and they didn't even know. Gunnar felt something twist in his gut that was equal parts grief and shame. How did you get here, Haley? Brick asked from behind. His voice was thick, wrecked. He was trying to hold it together and barely managing. How did you find us? Haley reached into the pocket of her oversized purple dress and pulled out a photograph. Crumpled, faded, creased so many times the edges were soft as cloth, handled by tiny hands, over and over, like a map to somewhere important. She held it up. 9 young men in front of a bonfire, mountains behind them, Ghost in the center, young, strong, alive, laughing, with his arm around Gunnar's shoulder. Both of them grinning like the world was theirs and nothing could touch them. Gunnar took the photo. His hands were shaking. He hadn't noticed until now. He turned it over. Written on the back in shaky, uneven handwriting, letters that wobbled and leaned and barely stayed on the line, was a message. Haley, these are Daddy's brothers. The diner on Route 72. Sundays. They're family. They'll remember. I love you past the moon and back, baby girl. Daddy. Gunnar read it twice, 3 times. His throat closed. He'd written it dying. Tyler, Ghost, Mercer had written this note with hands that shook so badly the pen could barely form letters. 5 weeks before the end, when the cancer was eating him alive and the medication made him forget where he was, and the only clear thoughts he had left were about his daughter. He finished it, made Claire watch him write it, made her promise to keep it. Because even dying, especially dying, Ghost planned ahead. Ghost took care of his people. Ghost made sure that when the worst came, there'd be a road to follow. He made Mommy keep it, Haley said. He told her the men in the picture would help. He said they were family. Colt let out a breath like he'd been punched. He wrote that while he was 5 weeks before, Haley said. Mommy told me. She said his hands shook really bad, but he wouldn't stop until he finished. Nobody at that table could speak for a long moment. 18 men, hardened by decades of living on the edge, silenced by a photograph and a dying man's handwriting. Brick wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and didn't care who saw it. Ratch stared at the table, and his jaw worked back and forth like he was grinding his teeth into dust. Deacon pressed his cross to his lips and whispered something none of them could hear. Judge opened his eyes. They were red. He didn't look away. He didn't hide it. And Fuse, the hothead, the one always ready for a fight, always cracking his knuckles, always loaded and waiting for a trigger, Fuse sat perfectly still with tears running down his face and didn't move to wipe them. Haley, Gunner said. He knelt down, slowly. His knees protested. 63 years and too many miles. But he got down to her level because this child deserved to be looked in the eye. Do you know what your daddy did for me? She shook her head. Nashville, 2016. We were outside a bar and a man came at me with a broken bottle. I didn't see him coming. Your daddy did. He tackled that man through a plate glass window. The glass cut his whole left side open. He was bleeding everywhere, and he didn't stop. Didn't even look at the wound. He just made sure I was okay first. Haley's lip trembled. For the first time, the brave mask flickered. He had a big scar, a long one, on his side. That's from the glass, from saving my life. What did he tell you it was from? He said he fell off a ladder fixing the roof. The table went silent again. Then Brick laughed, a broken, wet laugh that had more tears in it than humor. That sounds exactly like Ghost, Brick said. Never wanted anyone to worry about him. The man could be bleeding out on the pavement and he'd tell you it was just a scratch. One time, Colt said, and his voice was barely holding, your dad rode 60 miles through a thunderstorm. I'm talking lightning, trees coming down, roads flooded, because Gunner was sick and too stubborn to see a doctor. Ghost showed up at 3 in the morning with antibiotics and a bag of soup, soaking wet, grinning, like he'd just been out for a Sunday ride. And the time in Chattanooga, Stitch added quietly, rival crew was pushing hard. Everybody expected a war. Your daddy walked into a room full of men who wanted to hurt us. Alone, no weapon, nothing. And he talked them down. Just his voice, just his words. He prevented a war that night, Haley. Men are alive today because your father chose words over fists. He was the best of us, Gunner said. Every single man at this table knows it. Your daddy was the best man who ever wore this patch. Haley listened to all of it, taking it in, her green eyes moving from face to face like she was memorizing each one, matching them to the photo, connecting the living to the snapshot her dying father left behind. Then she said the thing that broke them all the way open. I need help. No preamble, no softening, no please if it's not too much trouble. Straight, honest, direct, exactly the way her father would have said it. Because Ghost never wasted words. Ghost never dressed up the truth, and neither did his daughter. Mommy's really sick. She coughs all night. Sometimes I put my hand on her back because she shakes so hard. There's a machine that helps her breathe, but it makes a scary sound, like a monster in the wall. She paused, swallowed, kept going. The doctors say she needs a big operation on her heart, but it costs more money than we have. Way more. Mommy tried to hide the papers, but I saw the numbers, and there were a lot of zeros. Another pause, steadier now, like she'd rehearsed this part, like she'd practiced it in a mirror, or in her head, or lying awake at night while her mother coughed in the next room. And the man who owns our building, he keeps coming to the door and screaming. He says we have to get out. He says bad words. He hit the door once so hard the whole wall shook, and I thought it was going to fall down. And Mommy cries when she thinks I'm sleeping. She looked at Gunnar, straight into his eyes. No wavering, no begging, just truth. But I'm not sleeping. I hear everything. The table was silent. 18 men, motionless. The diner around them had ceased to exist. There was nothing in the world except this child and the weight she'd been carrying alone for 8 months. Daddy's letter said to find you. He said you'd remember him. She held up the photograph again. The bonfire, the mountains, the young men laughing, a world that used to be. He said you'd help. Then her green eyes, Ghost's eyes, locked onto Gunnar's. Was he right? Gunnar looked at the photograph, at Ghost's face, 25, alive, fearless, arm thrown around Gunnar's shoulder like tomorrow was guaranteed. Then he looked at his own face in that photo, younger, unmarked, before the scar, before the funerals, before the nights when the road was the only thing that kept him sane. Then he looked at his brothers, Brick, eyes wet, jaw locked hard enough to crack teeth, nodding, already nodding before anyone asked. Ratch, phone already in his hand, already running the numbers, already calculating what it would take. Colt, on his feet, fists at his sides, vibrating with something between rage and purpose. Judge, eyes open, sharp, focused, more alert than Gunnar had seen him in years, like a man who'd been sleeping and just woke up to something that mattered. Stitch, hand on his med kit. The combat medic was back. The man who held soldiers together in the worst places on earth was ready to do it again. Fuse, both fists clenched, not angry, ready. A weapon that finally had a righteous target. Deacon, hand off his cross, standing, something in his face that went beyond prayer into the territory of action. Wraith, face hard, zero hesitation, already planning, already 3 steps ahead in the shadows where he operated best. Pike, Rooster, Dutch, Hammer, Torch, Slade, Grizzly, Flint, Boone, Cash, every single one rising, moving, ready, not because someone gave an order, because Ghost's little girl needed them, and that was all the reason any of them would ever need. Yeah, sweetheart, Gunnar said. His voice cracked and he let it. He was done hiding. He was right. He put his hand on her shoulder, gentle, steady, the hand of a man who'd broken bones and bent steel and torn the world apart when it wronged him, but who knew in this moment that the most important thing he'd ever do was be soft. Your daddy was our brother. That makes you family. And we don't let family drown. Not while we're still breathing. Not ever. Haley's lip trembled again, but she didn't cry. Not yet. She'd held it together for 8 months, and she wasn't going to break now. Not until she knew it was safe. Not until she knew someone else was going to carry the weight. Gunnar turned to his brothers. No speech, no vote, no discussion. 18 men, one look, one understanding that passed between them like an electric current, silent, instantaneous, unbreakable. Ratch, call the chapter treasury. I want to know every dollar available within the hour. Already on it. Colt, I need an address. Claire Mercer, somewhere in Memphis. I'll have it in 10 minutes. Stitch, find out everything about her condition. What she needs, who's the best surgeon in the region, where they are, and how fast we can move. I've got contacts at Vanderbilt. I'll start there. Brick, get the trucks ready. Full convoy. We're not going light. Brick stood. All 6'5", 295 pounds of him. Done. Judge, make calls. I want brothers from Nashville, Little Rock, and Birmingham on standby by noon. Judge nodded once, pulled out his phone. For a man of 15 words a day, He was about to make more calls in one morning than he'd made all year. Wraith, reach out to every chapter in the Southeast. Every brother who ever rode with Ghost hears about this. Nobody sits this out. Wraith was already moving toward the door, already disappearing. Pike, Rooster, start a phone chain. By sundown tonight, I want every man who ever called Ghost a brother to know his daughter walked into this diner and asked for our help. Every single one. What about me? Fuse asked. Gunnar looked at Haley, then back at Fuse. You're with her. She doesn't leave your sight. Not for 1 second. Fuse crouched down until he was eye level with Haley, the hothead, the man with fire in his blood and a temper shorter than a lit fuse. He looked at this 3-year-old girl and something in his face transformed completely. Hey kid, you like pancakes? Haley wiped her nose with the back of her hand. With chocolate chips? Is there any other kind? For the first time, the very first time since she'd walked through that door, Haley almost smiled. It was small, barely there, gone almost before it arrived, but it was real. She reached out and took Fuse's hand. Her tiny fingers could barely wrap around 2 of his, but she held on, and he held back, and together they walked toward the counter. Gunnar watched her go, watched the way her little rain boots, one held together with tape, squeaked on the tile. Watched the way she looked back over her shoulder once, just once, to make sure the men at the table were still there, still real, still not a dream. Then he looked at the photograph in his hand, Ghost's young face, laughing, alive, arm around Gunnar's shoulder, a night by a bonfire when the world was wide open and death was a rumor that happened to other people. He trusted us, Brick said quietly, standing by the booth, coffee still pooled on the table, hands trembling. Even dying, even at the end, he trusted us with the only thing that mattered to him. He knew we'd come, Judge said. 4 words, maybe the most important 4 words Judge had ever spoken. Gunnar turned the photo over, read the note one more time, the shaky letters, the wobbly lines, a dying man's hand fighting the pen, fighting the disease, fighting death itself, just long enough to write his daughter a map to safety. I love you past the moon and back, baby girl. Gunnar folded the photograph carefully, precisely, like it was made of glass. He opened his leather vest and slipped it into the inside pocket, right against his chest, right over his heart, where it would stay. Then let's not prove him wrong, Gunnar said. He stood. Every joint ached. Every year weighed on him, but his voice was iron. Saddle up, we ride in 20 minutes. Behind him, 17 men moved as one. Chairs pushed back. Boots hit the floor. The sound of purpose replacing the sound of laughter. The Sunday morning that started with poker jokes and coffee had just become something else entirely. At the counter, Haley sat on a stool that was too tall for her, feet dangling 6 inches above the ground, eating chocolate chip pancakes while Fuse sat beside her like a 240-pound bodyguard. She ate slowly, carefully, like someone who'd learned that food wasn't always guaranteed and you never wasted a single bite. Fuse watched her, and something inside his chest rearranged itself permanently. These are really good, Haley said. Yeah, Fuse said. His voice was strange, thick. He cleared his throat. Yeah, they are. She looked up at him. Green eyes. Ghost's eyes. Are you going to help my mommy? Kid, Fuse said, and he meant every syllable. We're going to do a lot more than that. Outside, 18 engines roared to life. The sound shook the windows of Grady's pit stop and rattled the coffee cups on every table. It rolled across the parking lot and out into the cold Memphis morning like a declaration of war. Not against a person, but against every injustice that had been done to a dead man's family. Ghost had made a promise from his deathbed. He'd written it on the back of a photograph with hands that could barely hold a pen. He'd trusted 18 men with his daughter's life. And now those 18 men were riding to keep that promise, with everything they had, everything they were, and everything they'd ever be. Gunnar pulled out of the lot first. He always rode in front, 24 years at the head of the pack. But today felt different. Today the road ahead wasn't just asphalt and distance. It was a straight line to a dying woman in a crumbling apartment who didn't know help was coming. It was a straight line to a little girl's only chance. It was a straight line back to Ghost, to a debt that could never fully be repaid, but would be honored with every mile, every dollar, every breath they had left. Gunnar twisted the throttle. The Harley surged forward. Behind him, 17 more followed. And in his vest pocket, pressed against his heart, a photograph of a dead man vibrated with the engine, as if Ghost himself was riding with them one last time. 14 blocks, that's all it was. 14 blocks between Grady's pit stop and the address Colt pulled up in under 8 minutes. 14 blocks between 18 men on Harleys and a woman who didn't know her 3-year-old daughter had walked out the door while she slept. Gunnar killed his engine first. The others followed. 18 bikes went silent at once, and the sudden quiet was almost worse than the noise. He looked up at the building, above a check cashing store, the kind of place where the stairs smelled like things you didn't want to name, and the walls were thin enough to hear your neighbor's nightmares. Brick, Stitch, with me, Gunnar said. Fuse, keep Haley in the truck until I say. Fuse nodded. Haley was sitting in Brick's pickup with syrup still on her chin, holding her one-eyed bear against her chest, watching the building like she was trying to decide if she was brave enough to go back inside. Is Mommy going to be mad I left? She asked Fuse. If she is, Fuse said, I'll take the blame. Tell her it was my idea. But it wasn't your idea. She doesn't know that. Haley thought about this for a moment. You'd lie for me? Kid, I'd do a lot worse than lie for you. Gunnar climbed the stairs with Brick behind him and Stitch bringing up the rear. The stairwell reeked. The railing was loose. One of the steps had a crack wide enough to catch a boot heel. He thought about Haley climbing these stairs every day, 3 years old, alone, and his jaw tightened until he could feel his own pulse in his teeth. Second floor, door at the end, a handwritten sign taped to it that said, Mercer, in crayon. Haley's handwriting. She'd drawn a sun next to it, yellow. Gunnar knocked. 3 steady knocks, not hard, not soft. The knock of a man who wanted to be heard without scaring whoever was on the other side. Nothing. He knocked again. Claire? Claire Mercer? My name is Gunnar. I knew your husband, Tyler. Ghost. A sound behind the door. Movement. Slow. Labored. The shuffle of someone who needed twice as long as they should to cross a room. The lock turned. The door opened 6 inches. A chain held it, and Gunnar saw her. He'd been prepared for bad. He wasn't prepared for this. Claire Mercer was 32 years old and looked like she'd lived twice that. Brown hair collapsed in a bun that hadn't been redone in days. Cheekbones sharp enough to cut, not from beauty, from malnutrition. An oxygen tube in her nose connected to a machine somewhere inside that wheezed and hummed. A flannel shirt that hung off her shoulders like it belonged to someone 30 pounds heavier. Dark circles under her eyes so deep they looked permanent, like bruises that would never heal. But her eyes were alive. Terrified, exhausted, barely holding on, but alive. And when she saw Gunnar's forearm through the gap in the door, the wolf tattoo, her hand went to her mouth and a sound came out of her that wasn't a word. It was recognition. It was 6 years of grief colliding with something she never expected to see again. Oh God, she whispered. Oh my God. We've got Haley, Gunnar said quickly. She's safe. She's downstairs with one of my guys. She's okay. Claire's knees buckled. She grabbed the door frame and the chain went taut, and Brick reached through the gap just fast enough to catch her arm before she went down. Easy, Brick said. We've got you. Can you take the chain off? Her hands were shaking so badly it took her 3 tries to slide the chain free. The door swung open and she looked past Gunnar, past Brick, down the stairwell, searching for her daughter. "She's safe," Gunnar said again. "I promise you. She's eating pancakes and she's safe." "She left," Claire said, and her voice broke completely. "She must have. I was sleeping. The medicine knocks me out. I didn't hear her leave. Oh God, she walked all the way to—" "She found us," Gunnar said. "She walked into the diner and she found us. She had a photograph, a note from Tyler." Claire's eyes filled. She pressed both hands against her face, and her whole body shook. Not sobbing, something deeper. The kind of shaking that comes from relief, so intense it's almost indistinguishable from pain. "He said you'd come," she whispered through her hands. "He made me promise to keep that photo. He said one day Haley would need it. I thought the medication was confusing him. I thought he was delirious. But he kept saying it, over and over. They'll come, Claire. When you need them, they'll come." "He was right," Gunnar said. Claire lowered her hands, looked at him, really looked, and something passed between them. Not romance, not attraction, but the shared grief of two people who loved the same man and lost him. "Tyler talked about you," she said, "all the time, especially at the end, when the pain was really bad and the medicine made him drift. He'd call out your name, Brick's name, Judge. He thought he was riding. He'd lay there in that bed, too weak to lift his own hand, and he'd say things like, 'Watch the curve, Gunnar,' and 'Brick, pull up on my left.' He was back on the road. In his mind, he was back with you." Brick turned away. His shoulders shook once. He pressed his fist against the wall and held it there. Stitch moved past them into the apartment. One look, that's all he needed. His face changed the way it used to change in Afghanistan when he'd walk into a village after an airstrike and realize the situation was worse than the briefing said. "Gunnar," Stitch said quietly, "we need to talk." Gunnar followed him. Brick stayed with Claire, one massive arm steady against the doorframe in case she fell again. The apartment gutted him. A mattress on the floor, no bed frame. One pillow with a stain the color of rust. An oxygen machine that sounded like it was one bad day from dying. A card table in the corner buried under a mountain of papers. Medical bills, eviction notices, past due stamps, final warning stamps, collections letters with red ink screaming from every envelope. The refrigerator had ketchup and half a loaf of bread. That was it. Haley had been making her own meals. 3 years old. Ketchup sandwiches on stale bread. Because that's what there was. "Her oxygen is at 84%, Stitch said, keeping his voice low. "Heart rate is all over the place. Ankles are swollen. That's fluid retention, which means her heart isn't pumping effectively. Gunnar, she's in heart failure. This isn't weeks away from critical. She's critical right now." "How long? Without intervention? Days. Maybe a couple of weeks if she's lucky. But luck isn't a medical plan." "What does she need?" "Valve replacement surgery. Both mitral and aortic from what I can see. That's a major operation. 7 to 9 hours minimum. A top cardiac surgeon. A hospital with a serious heart program." "Where?" "Vanderbilt, Nashville. I serve with a guy whose sister is a cardiac surgeon there. Dr. Rebecca Shaw. She's one of the best in the South. Lost her own sister to heart disease at 31. Takes pro bono cases when the cause is right. Call her." "I'm calling her the second we walk out of this room." Gunnar turned back toward the main room. Claire was sitting on the mattress now, Brick crouching beside her, and she was talking in a low voice with her eyes fixed on the floor. Gunnar caught the tail end of it, and what he heard made something inside him go very, very cold. "Banging on the door at midnight, screaming through the walls, calling me things I won't repeat. Last Tuesday he came up at 2 in the morning and kicked the door so hard the hinges bent. Haley woke up screaming." "The landlord," Brick said, not a question. "Carl Phelps, the building manager. We're 3 months behind. $2,400. I know I owe it, I know, but I can barely stand up long enough to make Haley's lunch. And he comes up here screaming like I'm choosing not to pay. Has he threatened you? Gunnar asked. Claire's hands twisted in her lap. She wasn't looking at any of them. He said if I don't pay by the end of the month, he'll have us removed. He said he knows people. He said a woman alone with a sick kid doesn't have many options, and I should remember that. Brick's hand curled into a fist so slowly it was almost imperceptible. But Gunnar saw it, and Gunnar knew what that slow curl meant. It meant Brick was controlling something enormous. Claire, Gunnar said carefully, is there anything else? She didn't answer right away. Her fingers kept twisting. She glanced toward the door, toward where Haley would eventually come through, and then she dropped her voice to barely a whisper. Last week, in the stairwell, Haley was coming up from outside. She'd been sitting on the steps because sometimes she goes down there when the oxygen machine scares her. Phelps was in the stairwell. He grabbed her arm. Brick stopped breathing. He grabbed a 3-year-old's arm, Claire said, and her whisper was cracking. Hard enough to bruise, I saw the mark. 4 finger-shaped bruises on my daughter's arm. She came upstairs and I couldn't even stand up to go down there and confront him. I couldn't protect my own child. I just sat on this mattress and held her and cried. What did Haley say? Gunnar asked. His voice was level, perfectly level. The kind of level that experienced men recognize as the most dangerous sound in the world. She said, Claire's face crumpled, "It's okay, Mommy. He's just mean because he's sad inside." 3 years old. She's 3 years old and she's making excuses for a grown man who hurt her because she doesn't want me to worry. She shouldn't have to do that. No child should ever have to do that. Gunnar stood up, slowly, every movement controlled. He looked at Brick, he looked at Stitch, then he looked at Claire. She won't have to anymore, not ever again. He walked to the door and called down the stairs. Colt, Fuse, Pike, Rooster, get up here, now. Boots on the stairs. 4 men appeared in under a minute. Bring Haley up, Gunnar told Fuse. Stay with Claire. Don't leave this apartment. Then he turned to Brick. You, Colt, Pike, and Rooster were paying a visit to Carl Phelps. Right now? Colt asked. Right now. Colt cracked his neck. Good. Fuse brought Haley upstairs. The moment Claire saw her daughter, she opened her arms and Haley ran into them and buried her face in her mother's neck. Claire held her so tight her arms shook from the effort. She was too weak to hold her own child the way she wanted to. She held her anyway. Don't ever leave like that again, Claire whispered. Promise me. I had to find them, Mommy. Daddy said they'd help. I know, baby. I know he did. Gunnar watched the 2 of them for exactly 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked down the stairs. 5 Harleys crossed Memphis in 12 minutes. Brick rode point, Gunnar behind him, Colt, Pike, and Rooster in formation. They didn't speed. They didn't need to. The sound of 5 Harley-Davidsons moving through a neighborhood like that, together with purpose, was its own kind of announcement. Phelps's office was on the ground floor of a strip mall. A glass door with his name on it in peeling letters. A desk. A filing cabinet. A family photo on the desk that Fuse would study later. 5 men walked in. Combined weight over 1,200 pounds. Leather, patches, ink, scars. The kind of men Carl Phelps had never faced in his life, because Carl Phelps only picked targets that couldn't fight back. Phelps looked up from his desk. His face went the color of old paper. Carl Phelps? Brick asked pleasantly. Who's asking? Friends of Claire Mercer. The change in Phelps was immediate. His back stiffened. His chin came up. The practiced aggression of a bully who doesn't realize the rules just changed. She owes 3 months, Phelps said. 2,400. I've been more than patient. You've been banging on her door at midnight, Colt said. Phelps blinked. I have a right to collect. You've been screaming through the walls, calling her names. Now wait a minute. You kicked her door hard enough to bend the hinges, Pike added, at 2 in the morning, with a 3-year-old child inside. Phelps stood up. He was trying to summon authority he didn't have. "I don't know what she told you, but that woman is a deadbeat tenant who—" "Sit down, Carl," Brick said. Something about the way Brick said it, quiet, almost gentle, the way you'd talk to someone who doesn't realize how close they are to the edge of a very tall building, made Phelps sit. Gunnar hadn't spoken yet. He stood by the door, arms crossed, watching, letting his brothers work. But his eyes were on Phelps with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world and none of the mercy. "Let's talk about the stairwell," Colt said. He pulled a chair from the corner and sat down directly across from Phelps. Close, too close, their knees almost touching. "Last week, the little girl, 3 years old, brown curls, purple dress. You remember her, Carl?" "I don't know what you grabbed her arm." Colt's voice dropped, quiet as a blade on a whetstone. "A 3-year-old girl. You grabbed her hard enough to leave bruises, 4 of them, shaped like fingers, your fingers." Phelps's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She was in the way. I didn't." "You grabbed a child," Rooster said from behind him, and Phelps flinched because he hadn't heard Rooster move. "Hard enough to bruise. There's no end to that sentence that helps you, Carl." Brick reached into his vest and pulled out an envelope. He placed it on the desk, opened it, stacked 30 $100 bills in a neat pile. $3,000. That's her balance plus interest. More than she owes. You're going to write "paid in full" on a receipt. You're going to sign it. You're going to date it. Phelps stared at the money, then at Brick, then at Colt, then at the 3 men blocking his only exit. "And then here's what happens next," Brick continued. "You never contact Claire Mercer again. Not a phone call, not a letter, not a knock on her door. You never look at her. You never speak to her. You never go near her daughter. Are you understanding me so far, Carl?" Phelps nodded, fast, mechanical. "I'm not finished. Mrs. Washington on the 4th floor, 75 years old, Social Security income. You raised her rent 30% last quarter. You're rolling that back, today. And the Nguyen family in 2C, you leave them alone too. Whatever you've been doing to people in that building who can't fight back, it's over. You can't just—" "Carl." Gunnar spoke for the first time. One word. Phelps's head snapped toward him like a man hearing a rattlesnake. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to hear every word. That little girl you grabbed, her father was our brother. He was the kind of man who would have handled this differently than we're handling it. He would have talked to you, reasoned with you, given you a chance to be better, because that's who he was." Gunnar uncrossed his arms. "He's dead now, and we're not him. So you're getting the version where you take the money, write the receipt, and never make the mistake of thinking you can touch a child without consequences. Are we clear?" Phelps's hands shook so badly it took him 4 tries to write the receipt. He signed it, dated it, pushed it across the desk. Pike picked up the family photo on Phelps's desk, studied it. A woman, 2 kids, a boy about 7 and a girl about 5. He set it down gently. "You've got kids, Carl. Imagine somebody grabbed your boy like that. Imagine somebody left bruises on your daughter. Sit with that for a minute. Really sit with it." Phelps couldn't look at the photo. He couldn't look at any of them. "One more thing," Brick said from the doorway. "That bruise on Haley's arm is going to heal. Kids heal fast. But I want you to know something about us, Carl. We don't heal. We remember everything. And we ride through this neighborhood every single Sunday. You'll hear us coming, every week, for the rest of your life." They walked out. 5 Harleys started simultaneously. The sound rattled Phelps's windows and knocked the family photo face down on his desk. Back at the apartment, Stitch had already made the call. Dr. Rebecca Shaw at Vanderbilt. She'd listened. She'd asked 3 questions. Then she'd cleared her schedule. "I told her Wednesday," Stitch told Gunnar on the stairwell. She said she could see Claire Wednesday. But Gunnar, I ran Claire's vitals again while you were gone. Her oxygen dropped to 82. Heart rate spiked to 115 resting. The edema in her ankles is worse than an hour ago. She's deteriorating in real time. Call Shaw back. Tell her we can't wait until Wednesday. Stitch already had the phone to his ear. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. Tomorrow, Stitch said. She'll see Claire tomorrow morning. She's clearing her surgical schedule. What time? She wants Claire there by 7 a.m., Nashville. That's 3 hours away. I know. Gunnar looked at his watch, looked at the building, looked at the sky. Then he called every brother on speed dial. Ratch answered first with numbers. Chapter Treasury has 38,000 liquid. Nashville chapter is wiring 12,000 by noon. Little Rock is sending 8. Birmingham is pledging 10. And Gunnar, Diesel Dave out of Atlanta called me. He heard through Wraith already. He rode with Ghost back in the early days. He's sending 7,000 and says there's more if we need it. How much total? 75,000 committed, and the phone chain hasn't even hit the Midwest chapters yet. Keep it going. Every dollar, every brother. Gunnar, people are asking about Ghost. They want to know why nobody told them. They want to know how his family ended up like this. Some of them are angry. They should be. I'm angry. Tell them to put their anger into their wallets, and we'll ride it out together. By nightfall, Claire knew everything. She knew about the money. She knew about Dr. Shaw. She knew about the convoy planned for 5 a.m. She sat on that mattress with Haley sleeping against her chest, and she stared at Gunnar with the look of a woman who had resigned herself to dying and was now being told she might not have to. Why? She asked. You haven't seen Tyler in years. You didn't even know he was dead. Gunnar pulled the photograph from his vest pocket, held it up so she could see the bonfire, the mountains, the 9 laughing men. Because he asked us to. Because he earned this when he bled for us. Because that little girl walked 14 blocks alone to find a diner full of strangers, and she wasn't afraid. Because her father raised her to trust us. And because if we don't do this, if we let Ghost's family go down while we sit around a diner drinking coffee on Sundays, then every patch on every vest in this room is just a costume. And we don't wear costumes, Claire. We wear what we earned. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked at Haley, sleeping. Then she looked at Gunnar. I need you to promise me something. Name it. If I don't survive the surgery, if something goes wrong, promise me, on Tyler's name, that Haley doesn't end up in the system. Promise me she stays with people who love her, people who'll tell her about her dad, people who read her pirate stories and do all the voices the way Tyler did. Claire, promise me. I'm not getting in that ambulance until you promise. Gunnar looked at this woman, 32 years old, dying, terrified. Not for herself, for her daughter. The same way Ghost wasn't afraid of the glass when he tackled a man through a window. The same way Ghost wasn't afraid of the storm when he rode 60 miles with antibiotics. The Mercers didn't fear for themselves. They feared for the people they loved. I promise, Gunnar said, on Tyler's name, on every mile I ever rode with him, on every scar he took for me, Haley will never be alone, not for one day. Ratch drafted emergency guardianship papers on his laptop right there on that card table between the medical bills and eviction notices. Claire read every single word. She could barely breathe. Her hands trembled so badly Stitch had to hold the pages still. But she read every word because this was her daughter's future, and she would not sign anything blindly. She signed. Gunnar signed. Stitch and Judge witnessed. Claire put the pen down, closed her eyes, let out a breath that seemed to carry 8 months of terror with it. Now I can go, she whispered. At 4:30 the next morning, Haley woke up to the sound of 18 Harley-Davidsons idling in the street below. She pressed her face against the window and looked down. "Mommy," she said. "Mommy, wake up. They're all here." Claire opened her eyes, listened. The rumble of engines vibrated through the floor and up through the mattress and into her chest, where it mixed with the irregular beating of her damaged heart. "All of them?" Claire whispered. "All of them. And there's an ambulance. And trucks." At 5 a.m., Stitch and Brick carried Claire downstairs on a stretcher they'd borrowed from a fire station. Haley walked beside them, holding her mother's hand the entire way, her rain boots, taped and broken, squeaking on every step. The convoy formed at 6. 1 ambulance, 3 pickup trucks, 18 Harleys, 6 bikes in front, 6 behind, 6 flanking the ambulance. Military precision. Stitch had served 3 tours. He knew how to organize a movement. This was no different. Precious cargo, hostile territory. Get to the objective. No delays, no excuses. Haley rode with Brick. She sat in the passenger seat with her one-eyed bear on her lap and pointed directions even though Brick had GPS. "Turn here," she said. "The GPS says go straight. I know a shortcut. You're 3. I'm almost 4. Turn here." Brick turned. It wasn't a shortcut. It added 11 minutes. He didn't care. "Tell me about your dad," Brick said after a while. Haley's face changed, softened, brightened. The face of a child remembering the best things she ever had. "He read to me every night, even when he was really sick, and his hands shook so bad he couldn't hold the book. He'd put it on the bed and turn the pages with one finger. Pirate stories. He did all the voices. The captain voice was really deep, and the parrot voice was really squeaky, and sometimes he'd make me laugh so hard I'd fall off the bed." "What was your favorite part?" "The part where the pirates found the treasure, because Daddy always said the treasure wasn't gold. He said the treasure was the people who sailed with you. He said that's what brotherhood means." Brick's hands tightened on the wheel. He stared at the road and didn't speak for a long time. When he finally trusted his voice again, his eyes were wet, and he didn't bother hiding it. "Your dad was right," Brick said. "He was absolutely right about that." Haley looked out the window. The Memphis skyline was disappearing behind them, and the road to Nashville stretched ahead, long and straight, and full of something she hadn't felt in 8 months. Hope. "And now you're all here," she said quietly. "So it's almost like having lots of dads." Brick's grip tightened until his knuckles were white. He didn't trust his voice for the next mile, or the mile after that. He just drove and let the tears fall, and kept Ghost daughter safe on the road to the only chance her mother had left. 3 hours on I-40 West, and Stitch's phone rang twice. The first call was from Dr. Shaw's office, confirming the surgical suite was reserved. The second call was from the ambulance. Claire's oxygen had dropped to 81%. Stitch pulled his bike alongside Gunner and signaled. Gunner understood without words. He raised his fist. The formation tightened. 18 bikes closed ranks around the ambulance like a steel cocoon, and the whole convoy surged forward, pushing 10 miles over the speed limit, then 15. A Tennessee state trooper clocked them near mile marker 147. Lights on, siren blaring. He pulled alongside Gunner, and Gunner slowed just enough to point at the ambulance. The trooper looked at the convoy. 18 Harleys, 3 trucks, 1 ambulance moving with military precision, and made a decision. He killed his siren, pulled in front of the lead bikes, and escorted them the remaining 62 miles to Nashville with his lights clearing traffic. He never asked for a license, never asked for a name. Sometimes you see something on the road and you just know. They hit the Vanderbilt University Medical Center parking lot at 8:47 a.m. 18 bikes parked in a row so tight a piece of paper couldn't fit between them. The sound of those engines cutting off simultaneously echoed across the concrete. And then there was nothing but silence and the distant wail of the ambulance backing into the emergency bay. Gunner was off his bike and at the ambulance doors before the paramedic could open them. Claire was conscious, but barely. Her skin was gray. The oxygen tube hissed. Her eyes were half open and searching. "Haley," she whispered. "Where's Haley?" "Right here, Mommy." Haley appeared at Brick's side, holding his hand, her rain boots still squeaking on the pavement. She reached into the ambulance and grabbed her mother's fingers. "I'm here. I didn't leave. I promised." Claire squeezed. It was the weakest grip in the world, but it was everything. They wheeled Claire through the emergency entrance, and Gunnar walked beside the stretcher, one hand on the rail, matching the pace exactly. He'd walked this walk before, beside hospital gurneys carrying brothers who'd been shot, stabbed, wrecked. But this was different. This wasn't a brother. This was a brother's wife. A brother's last wish. The only parent Ghost's daughter had left. Dr. Rebecca Shaw met them at the cardiac unit entrance. She was smaller than Gunnar expected. Wire-rimmed glasses, hair pulled back tight, hands that looked like they belonged on a piano, long fingers, precise movements, not a tremor in sight. But her eyes told the real story. Steel. Absolute steel. This was a woman who cut open chests and held beating hearts in her palms, and understood that every second of every operation was a war between life and death. She looked at the convoy of leather vests behind Gunnar, 18 men lined up, waiting. She looked at Haley, 3 years old, holding a one-eyed bear standing between Fuse and Brick like a jewel between two boulders. "Which one of you is Gunnar?" Shaw asked. "That's me. Stitch told me everything. Let's talk." She pulled him into a consultation room, just the two of them. She didn't waste a single word. "I examined her records on the drive-in. It's worse than we thought. Both mitral and aortic valves are severely compromised. Her heart function is at 35%. Normal is above 55. She's been living on borrowed time for months." "What does she need?" "Dual valve replacement. It's a 7 to 9 hour surgery. We go in, remove both damaged valves, replace them with mechanical prosthetics. If everything goes perfectly, she walks out of here in 4 to 6 weeks with a functioning heart." "And if everything doesn't go perfectly?" Shaw didn't look away. Gunnar respected that. She gave him the truth the way Ghost would have given it. Straight, no cushion, no apology. The success rate for this procedure in a healthy patient is about 85%. In Claire's condition, malnourished, dehydrated, heart function already critically low, I'd put it at 72%. That's strong, but it means there's a 28% chance she doesn't make it off the table. And without the surgery, 0%. She dies. Days, maybe 2 weeks. Then we don't have a choice. "No," Shaw said, "we don't. I want to prep her this afternoon and operate first thing tomorrow morning. I need her stabilized tonight. IV fluids, nutrition, oxygen support. Stitch can help with that. He's good. His brother told me about him. Stitch is the best medic I've ever known." "Then let him work. I'll handle the rest." Shaw paused, took off her glasses, cleaned them, put them back on. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Her husband, Ghost. Stitch said he died of pancreatic cancer at 34. Said he was a member of your chapter. Said he saved your life." "All true." "And this little girl, Haley, she walked into a diner by herself and found 18 bikers because her dying father wrote her a note telling her where to go." "That's exactly what happened." Shaw nodded slowly. "I lost my sister to heart disease when she was 31. That's why I do what I do. That's why I take cases like this. Because I couldn't save Jessica. I was still in medical school when she died. I had all the knowledge in the world and none of the power to use it. I swore on her grave I'd never let that happen again if I could help it." She looked at Gunnar with those steel eyes. "I'm going to fight for Claire the way I wish I could have fought for my sister. I want you to know that. I believe you." "Good. Now go be with that little girl. She needs you more than I do right now." Gunnar walked back into the waiting area. 18 men, some standing, some sitting, all watching. He looked at each of them. Brick, Ratch, Colt, Judge, Stitch, Fuse, Deacon, Wraith, Pike, Rooster, Dutch, Hammer, Torch, Slade, Grizzly, Flint, Boone, Cash, and he gave them the truth because these men deserve nothing less. 72% chance she makes it. Surgery tomorrow morning, 7 to 9 hours. It's the best shot she's got and the only shot she's got. And the little girl? Brick asked. She stays with us, right here. Nobody leaves until Claire is out of surgery and breathing on her own. Nobody was planning to leave, Colt said. I know, I just needed to say it. That afternoon was quiet in a way none of them were used to. 18 men who lived loud. Loud bikes, loud bars, loud arguments about poker hands, sat in a hospital waiting room and barely spoke above a whisper. Stitch worked with the nursing staff to stabilize Claire. IV fluids, nutritional support, oxygen levels monitored every 15 minutes. He translated every medical term for Gunnar in real time, standing at the nursing station like a sentry. Her oxygen is up to 86, Stitch reported at 4 p.m. Heart rate's stabilizing. The fluids are helping. Shaw wants to keep her on IV nutrition overnight to build her strength before surgery. Is it enough? One night? It's not ideal. Ideally, you'd want a week of stabilization. But we don't have a week. Shaw knows that. She's factoring it into her surgical plan. Haley refused to leave Claire's room. She sat in a chair beside the bed, a chair so big her feet dangled a foot off the floor, and held her mother's hand and talked to her about everything and nothing. The stuffed bear sat on the bed between them. His name is Captain, Haley told the nurse who came in to check Claire's vitals. Daddy gave him to me. He used to have 2 eyes and both arms, but he's been through a lot. Just like you, the nurse said softly. Captain doesn't complain, Haley said. Neither do I. The nurse looked at Gunnar, who was standing in the doorway. Her eyes were wet. She shook her head once and walked past him into the hallway. At 7 p.m., Ratch pulled Gunnar aside with an update. Total committed funds as of this hour, $89,000. The Midwest chapters came through. Kansas City sent $5,000. St. Louis matched it. A brother in Houston I've never even met wired $3,000 with a note that said, for Ghost. Diesel Dave in Atlanta upped his contribution to $10,000. And Gunnar, this is the part I didn't expect. Wraith reached out to chapters we haven't spoken to in years. Old rivalries. Bad blood from way back. Every single one of them sent money. Every single one. How much from those chapters? 14,000 combined. With a message, Ghost was Ghost. Whatever happened between us, Ghost was always solid. That's word for word, Gunnar. From men who wouldn't spit on us if we were on fire. They sent money for Ghost Kid. Gunnar felt something expand in his chest. Something he couldn't name. Pride, maybe, or amazement, or the simple, overwhelming proof that one good man's life, truly lived, truly given, echoes further than anyone imagines. Ghost did that, Gunnar said quietly, even dead, even gone 8 months. He's still bringing people together. Best of us, Ratch said, always was. That night, Claire asked to see Gunnar alone. Haley was asleep in Fuse's arms in the waiting room. The hothead held her like she was made of glass, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too hard, afraid that any shift would wake her. Deacon had draped his jacket over her. Judge sat 3 feet away, watching, always watching, as if his attention alone could shield her from harm. Gunnar walked into Claire's room and sat in the chair beside her bed. She looked better than she had that morning, color in her cheeks, oxygen at 88%. The IV was doing its work. But her eyes were the eyes of a woman who understood percentages, who understood that 72% meant 28% of never waking up. Tell me about him, she said. Tell me something I don't know, something from before. Gunnar leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, let the memories come. First time I met Ghost, he was 23, showed up at the clubhouse on a bike that had no business running. Half the engine was held together with zip ties and prayer. Brick took one look at it and said, "Kid, that thing's going to kill you before the road does." And Ghost just grinned and said, "It hasn't yet." Claire smiled, faint, but real. He prospected for a year, did everything we asked without complaint, cleaned the clubhouse, ran errands, took the worst jobs on every ride, never once said it was beneath him, and he never, not once, started a fight. Every other prospect comes in trying to prove how tough they are. Ghost came in trying to prove how steady he was. He didn't want to be feared. He wanted to be trusted. That's rarer than you think. "That's who he was at home too," Claire whispered. "He never raised his voice, not once. Even when things were bad, even when we had nothing, he'd sit at that kitchen table with bills stacked a foot high, and he'd just look at me and say, 'We'll figure it out, Claire. We always do.' The night he got his patch, the night he became a full member, we had a bonfire up in the mountains. That photograph Haley carried, that's from that night. Ghost didn't celebrate like the other guys, didn't get drunk, didn't shout. He sat by the fire and he said something I never forgot." "What?" He said, "I didn't join because I needed brothers. I joined because I wanted to be the kind of man who deserves them." And I looked at him and I knew, right then, that he already was. Claire's eyes closed. Tears slid down her temples into the pillow. "He talked about you every day at the end," she said. "Every single day. He'd be lying in that bed, too weak to lift his head, and he'd say, 'Gunner would know what to do. Brick would make you laugh. Judge would watch over Haley. He trusted you all with his life, and with ours. We're going to earn that trust, Claire, tomorrow and every day after." "I'm scared, Gunner." "I know. Not of dying. I'm scared of leaving her. She's already lost Tyler. If she loses me too, she's 3 years old. She can't lose both parents by the time she's 4. That's not a life. That's a punishment." "Listen to me." Gunner leaned forward, took her hand, held it the way he'd held the hands of dying brothers on roadsides and in hospital beds. Firm, warm, present. "You're not going to die tomorrow. You're going to fight. The way Ghost fought. The way Haley fights every single day. You're going to walk into that operating room and you're going to come out the other side because that little girl needs her mother and the universe owes the Mercer family a goddamn break." Claire laughed. Weak, wet, but a laugh. "And if the universe doesn't cooperate, then I'll have words with the universe. And trust me, the universe doesn't want that." She squeezed his hand. "Tyler was right about you. Tyler was right about most things, except poker. He was terrible at poker. He really was. He lost $200 on our anniversary and told me he spent it on a necklace that was being custom made. That sounds exactly like him. Did the necklace ever show up? 3 weeks later, he pawned his watch to buy it. I didn't find out until after he died, and I went through his things and the watch was gone." Gunner shook his head. "The man pawned his watch to cover a poker loss and still came out looking like a saint. That's a skill. That's Ghost." "Yeah," Gunner said, "that's Ghost." He sat with her until she fell asleep. Her breathing was steady. The monitors beeped in rhythm. The oxygen machine hummed. He watched her chest rise and fall and thought about a 34-year-old man lying in this same position 8 months ago, in a worse bed, in a worse place, writing a note with hands that could barely hold a pen because he loved his daughter more than he feared death. Gunner pulled the photograph from his vest pocket, looked at Ghost's laughing face by the bonfire. Young, strong, alive, the way he should still be. "I've got them, brother," Gunner whispered. "We've got them." He slipped the photo back against his chest, stood quietly, and walked out of the room. In the waiting area, the scene would have confused anyone who didn't know the story. 18 men in leather vests scattered across plastic chairs and linoleum floors. Brick was stretched across 3 chairs, his boots hanging off the end, snoring softly. Ratch sat cross-legged on the floor with his laptop, still tracking donations. Colt and Pike were asleep against the wall, shoulders touching. heads tilted toward each other like brothers in a foxhole. Deacon sat alone in the corner, lips moving, hands folded, praying. The man who never talked about faith was in his fourth hour of silent prayer. His silver cross caught the fluorescent light. Wraith sat by the window, staring into the Nashville night, perfectly still, keeping watch, the way he always did, the ghost guarding the perimeter. And Fuse still held Haley, hadn't moved in 3 hours. His arm was numb, his back ached. He didn't care. She slept against his chest with one hand gripping his vest, the same way she gripped her stuffed bear. Tight, desperate, the hold of someone who'd learned that things you love can disappear in the night. Gunnar stood in the middle of all of it and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not since Ghost was alive. Not since the bonfire in the mountains, in the nights when brotherhood wasn't a memory, but a living, breathing thing you could reach out and touch. He felt whole. "Get some rest," he told the few brothers still awake. "Tomorrow's going to be the longest day of our lives." Morning came like a fist, 5:30 a.m. The surgical team began prep. Claire was wheeled out at 5:50. Haley walked beside the gurney again, holding her mother's hand, matching every step. At the doors to the operating wing, the nurses stopped them. Family could go no further. Claire looked at Haley. Haley looked at Claire. "If I go to heaven like Daddy," Claire started. "You're not." Haley's voice was fierce, absolute. The voice of a 3-year-old who had decided this was not going to happen and would fight God himself to prevent it. "But if I do, I'll find Daddy, and we'll both watch over you, every single day. But that's not the plan, baby. The plan is, I wake up and you're the first thing I see. Pinky promise?" Claire extended her pinky. It trembled. The IV lines shook. Haley wrapped her tiny pinky around it. "Pinky promise, Mommy. Pinky promise." Gunnar stepped forward, lifted Haley onto his hip. She buried her face in his leather vest and grabbed it with both fists. The same grip, the same desperate hold, the same refusal to let go. She didn't cry, not one tear. And that, to every man standing in that hallway, was somehow the worst thing of all. Because a 3-year-old who doesn't cry when her mother is wheeled into surgery isn't brave. She's been broken so many times that she's learned tears don't change anything. She's learned to save her strength for the next hit. She's learned, at an age when the biggest problem should be a lost crayon, that the world takes what it wants and doesn't ask permission. Gunnar held her against his chest and felt her heartbeat, fast, small, terrified, against his own. "She's going to be okay," he told her. "How do you know?" "Because your dad asked me to make sure of it, and I don't break promises." Haley pulled back, looked at him. Those green eyes, Ghost's eyes, searched his face for the truth. "Uncle Gunnar?" "Yeah, kid. If Mommy doesn't come back, will you still be here?" The question hit him harder than any fist ever had. Harder than the broken bottle in Nashville. Harder than the scar on his jaw. Harder than 24 years of everything the road had thrown at him. "I will be here," Gunnar said. "Tomorrow, next week, next year, every year after that. I'm not going anywhere, Haley. None of us are." She studied his face for another long moment. Then she laid her head back against his vest, against the pocket where her father's photograph rested, against the heart of a man who just made the most important promise of his life to a 3-year-old girl in taped-up rain boots. "Okay," she whispered. "I believe you." The operating room doors closed, and the longest wait any of them had ever endured began. 6 a.m. The doors closed and didn't open again. Gunnar sat in the first chair nearest the operating wing entrance, Haley on his lap, her one-eyed bear pressed between them. She hadn't spoken since the doors swung shut, just stared at them, watching, waiting, as if the force of a 3-year-old's attention could reach through walls and steel and hold her mother's heart together. Brick paced, 295 pounds moving back and forth across the waiting room floor, in a rhythm so steady you could set a clock to it. 8 steps left, turn. 8 steps right, turn. The linoleum groaned under his boots. He didn't sit, couldn't sit. Sitting meant thinking, and thinking meant imagining what was happening behind those doors. And Brick couldn't afford to imagine that. Not now. "You're going to wear a trench in the floor," Colt said from his chair. "Then they'll have to bill me for it." "They can't bill you. You lost everything on a pair of 4s. Brick almost laughed. Almost. "Not the time, Colt. It's exactly the time. If I don't talk about something stupid, I'm going to lose my mind." Ratch sat cross-legged on the floor with his phone, doing what Ratch always did, running numbers. Not donation numbers this time. He was calculating surgical timelines, survival percentages, recovery windows, drug costs, rehabilitation schedules. He ran the numbers because numbers didn't have feelings. Numbers didn't cry. Numbers were the only thing in the world that made sense when nothing else did. Judge sat at the end of the row and watched the clock. Tick, tick, tick. Each second noted, each minute cataloged. He hadn't spoken since they arrived, hadn't needed to. Judge's silence wasn't empty, it was loaded. It was the silence of a man holding vigil the only way he knew how, by refusing to look away from the passage of time, as if his witness alone could slow it down. Stitch stood at the nursing station, arms folded, translating every code that came through the intercom. He'd positioned himself close enough to hear the surgical channel, but far enough not to interfere. Every time a nurse walked by, he read her face, body language, pace. He'd done this in field hospitals in Kandahar, reading the room, reading the people, measuring the distance between hope and disaster in the way someone walked through a door. "Anything?" Gunnar asked when Stitch drifted by. "They're in. Shaw is leading. No complications reported in the first 45 minutes. She's working on the mitral valve first. That's the standard approach. Worst valve first while the team is fresh." "How long for the first valve?" 3 to 4 hours if it goes clean. Then she'll move to the aortic. That's another 3 to 4. So we're looking at 6 to 8 hours minimum. At minimum. Could go 9 if she hits complications. Gunnar looked down at Haley. She was still staring at the doors. Her lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. He leaned closer and realized she was counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Over and over, counting to keep herself from screaming. "Hey," he said softly, "you want to draw? Colt found some crayons." Haley shook her head. "You want to eat something? Fuse said he'd get you anything." Another shake. "You want to talk?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is Dr. Shaw a good doctor?" "She's one of the best in the whole country." "How do you know?" "Because Stitch says so. And Stitch was a doctor for soldiers. He kept people alive in the worst places in the world. If he trusts Dr. Shaw, I trust Dr. Shaw." Haley considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court judge weighing evidence. "Did Stitch ever lose anyone?" Gunnar looked across the room at Stitch. The former combat medic was watching the nursing station again, jaw tight, hands still. Gunnar knew the answer to Haley's question. Every medic lost someone. It was the price of the job. The faces you carried home that never faded. "He did," Gunnar said honestly, "because he would not lie to this child. She'd been lied to enough by a world that promised safety and delivered none. But he saved a lot more than he lost. And the ones he lost, he remembers every single one. That's what makes him good. He never forgets what's at stake." Haley absorbed this. "I don't want Mommy to be one of the ones someone remembers losing." "She won't be. You don't know that." "No, I don't, but I believe it. And sometimes believing is all you've got." Haley looked at him with those ancient green eyes that had no business being on a 3-year-old, eyes that carried weight most adults would buckle under. And she said something that stopped him cold. "Daddy believed he'd get better too." Gunnar had no answer for that. Because she was right. Ghost believed. Claire believed. Haley believed. And Ghost died anyway. Believing didn't save him. Hope didn't save him. All the love in the world didn't stop pancreatic cancer from eating a 34-year-old man alive while his daughter watched. So what could Gunnar possibly say to a child who'd already learned at 3 that belief isn't a guarantee? He said the only true thing he had: your daddy believed in us. That's why you're here. That's why we're all here. He couldn't beat what happened to him, but he planned for you. He planned for this exact moment. He believed that if you ever needed help, 18 men in a diner would stand up and move heaven and earth for his little girl. And he was right, Haley. He was right about that. So maybe believing doesn't always save you, but sometimes it saves the people you love. Haley's lip trembled. She pressed her face into his vest. She still didn't cry, but her grip on the leather tightened until her small knuckles went white. 2 hours in, no update. Fuse sat on the floor next to Deacon, which was unusual because Fuse and Deacon were opposites in every way. Fuse ran hot, Deacon ran deep. Fuse solved problems with his fists, Deacon solved them with his faith. They'd never sat together voluntarily in 13 years of sharing the same table at Grady's. But today, Fuse needed something he couldn't punch, and Deacon had it. "You think it works?" Fuse asked quietly. "The praying." Deacon didn't open his eyes. "I think it works for me. That's not what I asked. It's the only honest answer I've got. I don't know if God is listening. I don't know if any of this makes a difference. But I know that when I pray, I feel like I'm doing something instead of nothing. And right now, nothing is killing me." Fuse cracked his knuckles, then stopped, then cracked them again. "I don't know how to pray." "Sure you do. You just talk. Like you're talking to me right now. Except you're talking to whoever you think might be out there." "What if nobody's out there?" "Then you're talking to yourself, which, honestly, is sometimes what you need." Fuse was quiet for a long moment. Then he closed his eyes. His lips didn't move. His hands didn't fold. He just sat there, eyes closed, in the middle of a hospital waiting room, and for the first time in his life did something that looked a lot like surrendering. Deacon opened one eye, glanced at Fuse, closed it again, and the faintest trace of a smile crossed his face. 3 hours. A nurse came through the doors. Stitch intercepted her before she made it 4 steps. "Claire Mercer, dual valve replacement, Dr. Shaw." The nurse checked her tablet. "First valve is complete. Mitral replacement went clean. No complications. Dr. Shaw is transitioning to the aortic now. Patient is stable." Stitch exhaled. Not a sigh. A controlled military-trained release of tension that was so precise it barely made a sound. He walked to Gunnar. "First valve is done. Clean. No problems. She's moving to the second." The room shifted. Not celebration, not relief, just the slightest loosening of the fist that had been clenching every man's chest for 3 hours. Brick stopped pacing for a moment. Ratch looked up from his phone. Pike and Rooster exchanged a glance. "That's good?" Colt asked. "That's good," Stitch confirmed. "Halfway there." "Halfway isn't done," Judge said. First words he'd spoken in over 4 hours. Everybody heard them. Everybody felt the weight. "No," Stitch agreed. "Halfway isn't done." 4 hours. Haley asked Colt for the crayons. She drew on the floor. Nobody stopped her. The nurses saw a 3-year-old drawing on hospital linoleum with crayons, and every single one of them decided that today the floor could handle it. She drew her family, Mommy in the middle with brown hair, Daddy next to her with wings, because he's in heaven. And around them, filling every inch of available space, 18 large figures in brown vests. Fu crouched down to look. "Which one's me?" Haley pointed. "That one, with the angry face." "I'm not angry. That's just how my face looks." "Uncle Deacon says you were born frowning." Deacon, still in the corner with his eyes closed, said nothing, but his smile got wider. Why does that one have really big arms? Colt asked, pointing at another figure. That's Uncle Brick. Because his arms are really big. Brick stopped pacing, looked at the drawing, looked at his arms, looked at the drawing again. Something broke behind his face. Not sadness exactly, something softer. The realization that a 3-year-old girl had already made him family in her mind, had already drawn him into her world, had already decided that these 18 men belonged in the same picture as her parents. That's a good drawing, kid, Brick said. His voice was thick. It's not done yet. I need more brown for the vests. I'll find you more brown. Brick, 6'5", 295 pounds, the enforcer, the man who'd made Carl Phelps write a receipt with shaking hands, walked to the pediatric ward nurses' station and asked, with absolute sincerity, if they had any brown crayons. They gave him the whole box. 5 hours, then 6. The loosening that came after the first valve update tightened again. Every minute past hour 5 felt heavier than the one before. Stitch hovered near the nursing station. His jaw was set. His calm hands weren't quite as calm. Why is it taking so long? Gunnar asked. The aortic valve is more complex, deeper in the chest, more blood vessels to navigate, and in her condition Shaw has to be meticulous. One wrong move, one nick to the surrounding tissue, and we're looking at catastrophic bleeding. Is there any way to know what's happening in there? Not unless a nurse comes out. No news is the best news right now, Gunnar. If something went wrong, we'd know. They'd be running for blood supplies. They'd be calling for backup. The fact that it's quiet means Shaw's working. Steady. Controlled. That's what we want. That's not what I want. I want her to walk through those doors and tell me it's over. I know. But we wait. That's the mission right now. We wait. Hour 7. Haley fell asleep. She'd finished her drawing and moved to Gunnar's lap, and her eyes had grown heavy, and her body had grown limp, and somewhere between one breath and the next, she'd surrendered to exhaustion. The bear was still in her arms. Her fingers still gripped Gunnar's vest. Even in sleep, she held on. Gunnar didn't move. His leg was numb. His back ached. He didn't care. This child had chosen him, had walked 14 blocks and chosen him, had pointed at his tattoo and chosen him, had fallen asleep in his arms and chosen him, and he would sit in this chair until his bones fused to the plastic before he'd disturb her. Brick had stopped pacing. He'd sat down for the first time in 7 hours. His massive frame folded into a plastic chair that groaned under his weight. He stared at his hands, hands that had broken jaws in bent steel and held brothers together in the worst moments of their lives. And he thought about Ghost. Remember the night Ghost earned his patch? Brick said quietly, to no one in particular. Colt looked up. The bonfire. The bonfire, up in the Smokies. We were all there. It was cold as hell and somebody, I think it was Torch, brought whiskey that tasted like paint thinner, and we drank it anyway because we were young and stupid and the fire was warm. Ghost didn't drink that night, Colt said. I remember that. No, he sat by the fire and he watched all of us, and he said that thing, the thing Gunnar told Claire. I didn't join because I needed brothers, Gunnar said from his chair, Haley sleeping against his chest. I joined because I wanted to be the kind of man who deserves them. The room went quiet. Every man who'd been at that bonfire heard the words and felt them land in the same place they'd landed that night. Deep, permanent, like a brand on bone. He was 23, Brick said. 23 years old, and he already understood something most men don't figure out in a lifetime. He didn't want to be tough, didn't want to be feared. He wanted to be worthy. He was, Judge said. 2 words. Absolute. He was, 17 other voices echoed, some aloud, some in whispers, some only in their own minds. But the agreement was total. Hour 8. The doors opened. Every head snapped toward the sound. Every body tensed. The plastic chairs screeched as men shifted and rose and leaned and strained to see who was coming through. It was a nurse, Not Dr. Shaw. Family of Claire Mercer? 18 men answered simultaneously. The nurse blinked, looked at the wall of leather and ink in anxiety standing before her. All of you? All of us, Gunner said. Dr. Shaw wanted me to update you. She's closing now. Both valves have been replaced. Mrs. Mercer is stable. Dr. Shaw will be out shortly to speak with you directly. The nurse left. The doors swung shut again, and for 5 seconds, nobody breathed. Then Brick sat down. Not intentionally. His legs just stopped working. 295 pounds dropped into a plastic chair, and the chair screamed under the impact, and his shoulders began to shake. He pressed both hands over his face, and his whole body heaved with the kind of silent, violent crying that big men do when they can't hold it anymore and don't care who sees. Colt punched the wall. Hard. Plaster cracked. He stared at his fist, shook it out, turned to the reception desk. I'm sorry. I'll pay for that. I'm sorry. The receptionist looked at the crack, looked at Colt, looked at the 18 men in leather vests. Don't worry about it, honey. Pike grabbed Rooster's shoulder and squeezed, and neither of them said a word because neither of them could. Deacon crossed himself. Once, twice. His hands were shaking for the first time all day. The man who'd prayed for 8 hours straight, silent, steady, unwavering, finally let the shaking come because the prayer had been answered, and the relief was bigger than his ability to contain it. Wraith stood by the window, hadn't moved, but his reflection showed something his face wouldn't. Eyes that were wet. The ghost. The shadow. The man who handled things nobody talked about. Crying silently in a hospital window's reflection where he thought nobody could see. Judge saw. Judge always saw. He didn't say anything. He just stood between Wraith and the room, blocking the view, giving the ghost his privacy. And then the doors opened again. Dr. Rebecca Shaw walked out, scrub cap in her hand, sweat on her forehead, dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there 8 hours ago. Her surgical gown was wrinkled, stained, bearing the evidence of a battle fought at the cellular level. 18 men stood at once. The sound was like thunder. Boots, chairs, leather, movement. A wall of men rising together as a single unit. Shaw looked at them. Really looked. 18 men who'd driven 3 hours from Memphis. Who'd slept on a hospital floor. Who'd paced and prayed and drawn with crayons and punched walls and cried in window reflections and held a 3-year-old girl through the longest 8 hours of her life. All for a woman most of them had never met until yesterday. All because of a dead man's photograph and a dying man's faith. Shaw smiled. She made it. 2 words. And the room exploded. Brick's head came up from his hands. His face was a wreck. Red eyes, wet cheeks. The face of a man who'd been torn apart and put back together in the span of 10 seconds. Both valves were replaced successfully, Shaw continued. She's breathing on her own. Her heart rhythm is stable. The next 48 hours are critical. I won't lie to you about that. We need to watch for infection, for clotting, for rejection. But the surgery itself was a success. She fought hard. She came through. Colt started to punch the wall again, caught himself, and grabbed Pike instead. The two of them held each other for 3 full seconds before separating and pretending it didn't happen. Deacon sat down, put his face in his hands, and wept openly. The silver cross dangled between his fingers, swaying. 13 years of Sunday mornings at Grady's, and none of them had ever seen Deacon cry. They were seeing it now. And not one man looked away because that kind of tears demanded witness. Stitch walked to Shaw and shook her hand. He didn't speak, couldn't. 3 tours in Afghanistan, hundreds of patients, a career built on staying calm when everyone else was falling apart, and he couldn't form a single word. He just shook her hand and nodded, and she understood everything that nod contained. She's a fighter, Shaw said to Gunner. I've operated on hundreds of patients. She's one of the strongest I've seen. Her body was failing, but her will, Her will was iron. I could feel it on the table. She wasn't ready to go. She has a 3-year-old daughter who needs her, Gunnar said. She's not going anywhere. Haley stirred in his arms, blinked. The waiting room swam into focus. Faces, tears, leather vests, the sound of her name being whispered from 18 directions at once. Uncle Gunnar? Her voice was thick with sleep. Is Mommy okay? Gunnar looked at Dr. Shaw. Shaw nodded. Your mommy's okay, kid. The doctor fixed her heart. Haley's eyes widened. Fully awake now, every trace of sleep burned away by the single most important sentence she'd ever heard. Fixed it? Like really fixed it? It works now? It works now. Both parts. The doctor took out the broken pieces and put in new ones, and your mommy's heart is beating strong. Haley stared at him, searching his face, looking for the lie, looking for the catch, looking for the part where the world reached in and took this away too, the way it took her father, the way it took their apartment, the way it took everything good and left nothing but ketchup sandwiches and a one-eyed bear in 14 blocks of cold pavement. She didn't find the lie, because there wasn't one, and Haley Mercer broke. Not the way adults break, controlled, measured, dignified. The way a 3-year-old breaks when 8 months of weight finally lifts. The way a child breaks when she's been holding herself together with tape and willpower and the memory of a father who told her to be brave. And she suddenly doesn't have to be brave anymore. She screamed, not a word, just a sound. Pure, raw, unfiltered. The cry of a child who'd finally been given permission to be a child again. And then the sobs came. Great, heaving, whole-body sobs that shook her tiny frame and soaked Gunnar's leather vest and echoed off the waiting room walls. She cried for her daddy who died in a bed he couldn't get out of. She cried for her mommy who coughed through the night while a machine wheezed in the dark. She cried for the apartment and the mean landlord and the bruise on her arm and the stairwell and the cold and the 14 blocks she walked alone because a letter told her to. She cried for every night she lay awake listening to her mother weep and pretended to be asleep. She cried for the ketchup sandwiches and the broken rain boots and the stuffed bear with one eye. She cried for every moment of every day for the last 8 months, when she should have been playing with dolls and learning colors and laughing at cartoons, but instead was keeping herself and her dying mother alive through sheer, impossible, heartbreaking will. Gunnar held her, didn't say a word, didn't try to stop it, didn't say it's okay or don't cry or be strong. He just held her, both arms, full weight, absorbing every sob like a wall built specifically for this purpose, to stand firm while someone else finally fell apart. And around them, in that hospital waiting room, 18 Hell's Angels stood in silence and let a 3-year-old girl's tears wash over them like rain after the longest drought any of them had ever known. Brick wiped his face with the back of his hand and then gave up and let the tears fall. Colt leaned against his cracked wall and pressed his forehead to the plaster, and his body shook. Judge stood perfectly still with his eyes open and his cheeks wet and did not look away. Would not look away, because this moment deserved his witness, the way every moment of this child's impossible journey had deserved it. Fuse crouched on the floor with his head bowed and his fists on his knees, and something in his chest rearranged itself permanently and irreversibly. The hothead, the fighter, the man who solved everything with anger. He would never be the same after this. None of them would. Deacon pressed his cross to his lips and whispered 2 words through his tears. Thank you. And Wraith, standing at the window, reflected in the glass, the ghost who appeared and disappeared, who handled things nobody talked about, who showed nothing to no one ever. Wraith turned away from the window and let the room see his face. Let them see the tears. Let them see the crack in the granite. Because some moments are bigger than any mask, and this was one. Haley cried for 11 minutes. Not that anyone counted, but Judge counted, because Judge always counted, and he would remember that number for the rest of his life. When she stopped, it wasn't sudden. It was gradual. The sobs slowed. The shaking eased. Her breathing deepened. She pulled back from Gunnar's chest and looked at him with swollen eyes and a face streaked with tears and snot and the devastating, radiant, unbearable beauty of a child who has just been given back her world. "Can I see her?" Haley whispered. Gunnar looked at Shaw. Shaw hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. She's still sedated. She won't be awake, but you can sit with her. Gunnar carried Haley through the doors, down the hallway, past the recovery rooms, into a small room where Claire Mercer lay on a hospital bed, with tubes in her arms and monitors beeping, and an oxygen mask over her nose and mouth. She was pale, still. Her chest rose and fell in a rhythm that was steady for the first time in months, maybe years. Haley reached out and touched her mother's hand. "Hi, Mommy," she whispered. "You did it. You kept your pinky promise." Claire didn't move, didn't respond. The monitors beeped. The machines hummed. Haley carefully climbed onto the bed, lay down beside her mother, pressed her face against Claire's arm, put one tiny hand on her mother's chest, directly over her heart, felt the beat, strong, steady, alive. "I can feel it," Haley whispered. "Your new heart. It's working, Mommy. I can feel it working." She closed her eyes, and within 30 seconds she was asleep, curled against her mother, hand on her chest, feeling the heartbeat, the steady, mechanical, miraculous rhythm of a heart that had been rebuilt by a surgeon who lost her own sister and swore on her grave she'd never let it happen again. Gunnar stood in the doorway and watched them, mother and daughter, surviving, together. He pulled the photograph from his vest, looked at Ghost's laughing face one more time. "She's okay, brother," he whispered. "They're both okay." He slipped the photo back against his chest and stood guard in that doorway and didn't move for the next 3 hours. Not once, not an inch. Because some promises don't end when the surgery is over. Some promises are just beginning. Claire opened her eyes on Saturday morning, 4 days after the surgery. The first thing she saw was Haley's face 3 inches from hers. Green eyes wide open, watching. The way she'd been watching every morning since the operation, sitting in that oversized hospital chair, waiting for the exact moment her mother's eyes opened so she could be the first thing Claire saw. "Mommy," Haley's voice was barely a whisper. "You're awake." "I'm awake, baby." "You look different." "Different how?" Haley tilted her head, studying her mother's face the way she studied everything, carefully, completely, missing nothing. "You look peaceful tired, not scared tired. Before, you always looked scared tired, even when you were sleeping." Claire reached out and touched her daughter's face. Her hand was still weak. The IV line tugged, but she touched her, felt her, warm, real, alive. "I'm not scared anymore," Claire said. "Because they fixed your heart? Because you found them. Because you walked 14 blocks by yourself and found them. You saved me, Haley. You know that, right? You saved my life." Haley shook her head. "Daddy saved you. He wrote the letter. I just delivered it." Claire pulled her daughter close and held her and cried into her hair, and Haley held her back, and for the first time in 8 months, neither of them was pretending to be stronger than they were. Recovery was brutal. 4 weeks in the hospital, physical therapy that left Claire shaking and sweating and wanting to quit, medication that killed her appetite and made her dizzy and turned her sleep into a battlefield of strange dreams, coughing fits that felt like they'd ripped the stitches open, pain that came in waves, manageable 1 hour, crippling the next. But she fought, every single day, because every morning Haley was there. And behind Haley, rotating in shifts without complaint, driving 3 hours from Memphis and 3 hours back, were the brothers. Brick came on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He smuggled barbecue sandwiches from a place in Memphis that Claire had mentioned once, in passing, that she missed. Stitch pretended not to see the contraband food. Brick pretended Stitch wasn't pretending. "If the nurses catch you bringing that in here," Stitch said, "I'm not defending you." "You won't have to. I'll just eat the evidence." "You already ate half of it in the parking lot." Quality control. Colt and Fuse traded weekend shifts. They'd sit with Haley in the hospital cafeteria and help her with the coloring books the pediatric ward nurses kept supplying. Fuse, it turned out, was surprisingly good at staying inside the lines. Colt was terrible. "Uncle Colt, that's not even close," Haley said, pointing at his work. "It's abstract." "It's a mess." Same thing. Judge came at odd hours, midnight, 3 a.m. He'd appear like a shadow, silent, steady, and sit beside Haley's sleeping form and read aloud. Pirate stories, the same ones Ghost used to read. He did the voices, not as well as Ghost, probably, but he tried. The captain voice was low and gruff. The parrot voice was high and ridiculous. And sometimes in the middle of a sentence, Haley would stir and smile in her sleep, and Judge would pause, watch her, and then continue reading as if the only audience that mattered was already listening. "She can't hear you," Claire whispered one night from her bed. "Maybe not," Judge said without looking up, "but maybe she can." Ratch handled the money, $97,000 total, from chapters across the South and Midwest, Kansas City, St. Louis, Houston, Atlanta, Nashville, Little Rock, Birmingham. Men who'd never met Claire Mercer. Men who'd never seen Haley's face. Men who only knew one thing. She was Ghost's woman, and Ghost was a brother. That was all the reason they needed. That was all the reason there ever was. Ratch set up a trust. College fund for Haley. Medical fund for Claire's ongoing care. Rent covered for 6 months. Every dollar accounted for. Every cent tracked. Because Ratch didn't just run numbers. He ran them with the precision of a man who understood that this money represented the collective love of hundreds of men who'd turned grief into action, and he would not waste a single penny of it. The day Claire was discharged, the brothers didn't take her back to the apartment above the check-cashing store. They didn't take her back to the stairwell where Phelps had grabbed Haley's arm. They didn't take her back to the mattress on the floor and the oxygen machine that wheezed in the dark and the refrigerator with nothing but ketchup and half a loaf of bread. They took her somewhere else. Gunnar drove. Claire sat in the passenger seat, thin and tired and healing, with Haley on her lap because Haley refused to sit anywhere else. They pulled up to a house on a quiet street, and Gunnar stopped the truck and didn't say anything. Claire looked at the house. 2 bedrooms, small yard, working streetlights, kids on bicycles down the block, a front porch with a railing that didn't wobble, and a bright yellow front door. "What is this?" Claire asked. "This is yours." She stared at him. "What?" "First month's paid, deposit covered, furniture inside, donated from brothers across 3 states, pantry stocked, fridge full, everything you need." Claire couldn't move, couldn't process. She sat in that truck and stared at the yellow door, and her brain tried to reconcile the life she'd been living, the mattress, the bills, the terror, with what she was seeing now. Haley had no such problem. She was out of the truck before Claire could stop her. "This is ours?" Haley shouted from the walkway. "This is ours," Claire managed. "It has a yellow door." "It does." "I told Uncle Gunnar yellow is the color of happy things, and he remembered." She ran to the door, touched it with both hands, pressed her face against it like she was hugging it. "Daddy would love the yellow door," Haley said, quieter now, her hands still flat against the paint. "He always said our next house would have a colored door. Not white, not brown, a real color. He said real colors mean real living." Claire got out of the truck, slowly, her body still healing. Her heart, the new mechanical valves ticking steadily in her chest, working hard. She walked to the front door and stood behind her daughter and put her hands over Haley's hands on the yellow paint. "He would have loved it," Claire said. "He can see it," Haley said. "From heaven, he can see the yellow." Months became years, the way they do when life stops being about survival and starts being about living. Claire healed, got stronger, put on weight, the color came back to her face. She started working, office management for a construction company Gunnar connected her with. Her boss told Gunnar after 3 months that Claire was the most organized person he'd ever hired. By the end of the first year, she was promoted. By the end of the second, she was running the office. Haley grew, started preschool with a confidence that startled her teachers. When asked to draw her family on the first day, she drew 20 people, 2 in the middle, a woman with brown hair and a man with wings. Around them, 18 large figures in brown vests. "Those are my uncles," she told her teacher. "They ride motorcycles and they're really loud, but they're the nicest people in the whole world." The teacher called Claire that afternoon. "I just want you to know, your daughter told the entire class she has 18 uncles who are bikers, and they saved her mommy's life. Is that true?" "Every word," Claire said. At 6, Brick taught Haley to clean a motorcycle chain. She got grease on her face and her clothes in Brick's truck, and she loved every second of it. "Uncle Brick, can I start one?" she asked. "When you're 16, Brick said. "That's 10 whole years. It'll go fast." Not fast enough. At 9, Ratch helped her with math. She was 2 years ahead of her class. Ratch would sit at the kitchen table in the house with the yellow door and run through problems with her and shake his head in amazement. "She's smarter than me," he told Gunnar. "She was always smarter than you," Gunnar said. "She was smarter than you at 3. At 12, Deacon gave her a leather journal. "Write everything down," he told her. "Your dad never did. All we have now are fading memories and one photograph. Don't make that mistake. Write it all. Every moment, every feeling, everything you want to remember." She filled 16 journals by the time she was 18. Every page, front and back, the story of her life, her father, her mother, and 18 men who showed up. At 15, Judge taught her to ride. She fell twice, got back on 3 times. By the end of the afternoon, she was riding circles around the parking lot with a grin on her face that every man present recognized because it was Ghost's grin. Identical, unmistakable. The grin of someone who'd found the thing they were born to do. "She's a natural," Judge told Gunnar. "She's her father's daughter." "No," Judge said. "She's better." Claire met a man named James when Haley was 11, a paramedic, steady, kind, the kind of man who brought flowers for no reason and fixed the porch railing without being asked, and never once raised his voice, and never once made Claire feel like she had to earn his love. Gunnar invited James to the clubhouse. 18 men sat around the table and grilled him for 3 hours. James answered every question without flinching. "What are your intentions?" Gunnar asked. "To love her, to be good to Haley, to never make either of them feel unsafe. And if you hurt them?" James looked around the table. 18 men, leather, scars, tattoos, eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. He understood exactly what the question meant and exactly what the consequences were. "Then I deserve whatever comes," James said. Brick nodded once. "Correct answer." They married at the clubhouse. Gunnar walked Claire down the aisle because Ghost couldn't, and because no other man on earth had earned the right. Haley was maid of honor in a yellow dress, because yellow was the color of happy things, and this was the happiest day of her mother's life. Years passed. Haley graduated high school as valedictorian. 600 people in the auditorium. Her speech silenced every one of them. "When I was 3 years old, I walked into a diner looking for help. I was scared. I was alone. My father had just died. My mother was dying. I had nothing except a photograph and a note written by a man who loved me enough to plan for a future he'd never see." She looked at the front row. 18 men in leather vests. Older now, grayer, some with canes. Brick's hair had gone white. Ratch wore reading glasses. Judge moved slower, but still watched everything. Deacon's cross had been replaced twice because he wore them out. But they were there. All of them. Every single one. I found 18 strangers that day. They became my family. They saved my mother's life. They raised me. They taught me that loyalty isn't a word. It's a choice you make every single day when it's inconvenient and expensive and exhausting and nobody's watching. She held up her wrist, a leather bracelet. Ghost burned into the hide. She'd never taken it off. Not once. Not in 15 years. My father died at 34. He never saw me start school. Never taught me to ride a bike. Never walked me to my first day of anything. But he did something most parents never have to do. He planned for a world without him. He wrote a letter. He trusted 18 men. And those 18 men moved heaven and earth for a 3-year-old girl they'd never met because her father was their brother, and that was all the reason they needed. Her voice cracked. She let it. Brotherhood isn't blood. It's showing up. It's keeping promises. It's riding 210 miles to save a woman you've never met because her husband rode with you and bled for you, and that means his family is your family. Forever. No exceptions. No expiration date. Standing ovation. 3 minutes. The longest 3 minutes of applause that auditorium had ever heard. And in the front row, 18 men in leather vests stood with everyone else. And not one of them bothered hiding the tears. More years. The world turned. Seasons changed. Brothers aged. The Sunday mornings at Grady's continued. Different faces joining the table as younger members earned their patches. But the original 18 never missed. Not once. Until Gunner's body started failing. 78 years old. Cancer. The same thief that took Ghost. The cruel, circular poetry of it wasn't lost on anyone. The disease found Gunner the way it found Ghost, quietly and without mercy. Haley came every day, read to him, pirate stories, the same ones Judge used to read at 3 a.m. in the hospital. The same ones Ghost used to read with all the voices. She did the captain voice low and gruff, and the parrot voice high and ridiculous, and sometimes Gunner laughed so hard he coughed, and sometimes he coughed so hard he couldn't laugh, and Haley kept reading anyway, because that's what you do. You keep going. You keep showing up. The Mercers didn't quit, and Haley was a Mercer through and through. One afternoon, near the end, just the two of them in the room. "I saw your dad last night," Gunner said. His voice was thin now, paper thin, the voice of a man whose body was leaving, even if his mind wasn't ready. In a dream. Felt real. More real than this room. He looked young, the way he looked in the photograph, laughing, strong. What did he say? 2 words. Thank you. For what? For keeping the promise. Haley took his hand, the same hand that had lifted her in the hospital waiting room, the same hand that had held her against his chest while she sobbed for 11 minutes, the same hand that had been gentle when every other part of him was steel. She held it now and felt how thin it had become, and how fragile and how warm it still was. "You did more than keep a promise, Gunner. You gave us a life." He smiled, weak but real. The smile of a man who'd ridden 1,000,000 miles and broken 1,000 rules and bent the world to his will when it refused to bend on its own. And who'd found in the end that the thing he was most proud of was a yellow front door and a little girl who grew up loved. "That's all I ever wanted," he said. He passed that night, peaceful, in his sleep, the way men like Gunner rarely get to go, quiet, warm, with the people who loved him close enough to touch. The funeral drew 400 bikers from every chapter in the Southeast. Haley spoke. She stood in front of 400 men in leather and told them about a Sunday morning when she was 3 years old and walked into a diner with a photograph and changed 18 lives. She told them about pancakes with chocolate chips and brown crayons and pirate stories at 3 a.m. She told them about a yellow door and a pinky promise and a man who carried her through the hardest hours of her life without once telling her to stop crying. They buried Gunnar in his vest, patches and all, the way he would have wanted, the way he'd earned. Every engine revved 3 times, 400 Harleys, 1,200 revolutions of thunder that rolled across the Tennessee hills and shook the ground and echoed off the mountains where a bonfire had burned decades ago, and young men had laughed and made promises they'd spend the rest of their lives keeping. That evening, Haley stood alone before the memorial wall at the clubhouse. 2 photographs, side by side. Ghost, young, laughing, arm around Gunnar. Gunnar, silver-haired, scarred, the wolf tattoo visible on his forearm, even in the photo. She touched her father's face, then Gunnar's. "We're okay, Dad. We're okay because of you. Because of all of you. Because you wrote a letter with hands that could barely hold a pen and trusted 18 men with your daughter's life. Because you loved me past the moon and back. Because you planned for a future you'd never see and built a family out of men who had nothing in common except a wolf tattoo and a willingness to show up." She pressed the leather bracelet, Ghost, against her heart. "And Gunnar, thank you for the yellow door, for the pirate stories, for holding me when I finally broke, for every mile, every dollar, every Sunday, every promise. You didn't just keep your word. You gave a 3-year-old girl her whole life back." She stepped away from the wall. 18 photographs now. Brothers lost over the years. Each one a story, each one a promise, each one proof that the bonds forged in fire and blood and miles don't end when the engine goes quiet. She walked outside into the Tennessee evening. The sky was dark, the air was warm. Somewhere down the highway, an engine rumbled. A single Harley, riding alone, growing fainter. She listened until the sound disappeared, and then she listened a moment longer. Because somewhere on a road between this world and the next, 2 brothers were riding side by side, young again, laughing, free, Ghost and Gunnar, shoulder to shoulder, the way they'd been in the photograph, the way they'd always be. The engines might go quiet, the men might rest, but the family they built and the promises they kept would ride on. In every journal Haley filled, in every story she told, in every yellow door she'd ever open, forever.